we're very pleased to have here Senator Portman at the Ukraine Crisis Media Center. He spent a full day in Ukraine visiting having meetings with many Ukrainian dignitaries, and we are very anxious to hear your feedback and some of the messages you would like to deliver. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and it was wonderful to be back in Ukraine and good to be here at the Media Center again in a different location. As some of you know, I was here about a year ago, and I was one of the 2 U.S. senators who came as part of the OSCE to monitor the presidential election. I wanted to come back a year later and get an update in person as to what's been happening in the country. And frankly, there is good news and bad. The good news that I received in my meetings today and yesterday is that a number of reforms have been put in place. Some have only passed recently through the legislature, where I was today, and haven't been fully implemented. But the direction is very positive in terms of reforms to fight corruption, to expand the economy, to ensure that some of the promises that were made during the presidential election are kept. And I'm very encouraged by that, and had a good opportunity to speak again with a number of people, including legislators, about that. But second, I was here today at a time when, unfortunately, the crisis on the border is worse. So the Crimea invasion had happened a year ago, but frankly, I think the world has been surprised by the aggression of the separatists backed by Russia along the eastern border. And so I must say, although I'm encouraged by the progress that's being made in the country in terms of the reforms, and I see the energy and enthusiasm for that, I am very concerned still about the fact that the war continues. And despite the best efforts of many to put a ceasefire in place, the ceasefire obviously has not held. In fact, I learned today in my meetings that since the ceasefire, there have been over 1,000 shelling incidents reported. 70 people have been killed, and that's just since the last ceasefire. So I am both pleased to be here and to see the government beginning to put in place these important reforms to help the Ukrainian people, but also discouraged by the fact that the aggression continues on the border. I had the chance yesterday to meet with Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. He is someone who I've come to respect, both in my time in the United States Senate, but also when I was U.S. Trade Representative. He was the Trade Minister for Ukraine, and I negotiated an agreement with him regarding the accession to the World Trade Organization. So it was good to have a chance to get an update from him about the economic reforms and also about what's going on with regard to the aggression in Luhansk, Donetsk, and the eastern border. I also met with the Minister of Interior, Avakov. I met with Mr. Turchinov, the Minister of Economy, Mr. Abramovich, who spoke to me quite a bit about some of the economic reforms and some of the ways the United States can help even more. I also was able to go to the Parliament again and to meet with Speaker Roisman and other members of the Parliament. And I also was able to meet with some civic leaders here in Kyiv. And finally, had an excellent meeting with President Poroshenko. In Congress, I was able to report to them that we have made some progress in the last year in the sense that we've passed legislation standing up for Ukraine and Ukraine's independence. We have also formed a caucus in the United States Senate. I'm the co-founder and co-chair of that caucus along with Senator Durbin from Illinois. It is bipartisan. We have about a dozen members of Congress who are very involved with it. We have met, for instance, with parliamentarians from here who have gone to Washington over the last year. We've also met with all of the ambassadors to the United States from the European Union to talk about the crisis on the border and to talk about ways we can work together. I've also been involved in encouraging the administration to continue to provide economic support consistent with the legislation that we passed late last year to provide the kind of military assistance that Ukraine needs to be able to defend itself. So this was good to get an update. I continue to be concerned. I continue to hope that the free-loving nations of the world will be unified in supporting Ukraine. The United States, of course, our NATO allies, of course, but also other countries around the world who share the vision that Ukraine has chosen, the path that Ukraine has chosen, which is a path of economic freedom, political freedom, and looking at the Maidan today, it looks a little different than it did a year ago, but the spirit still remains. And that spirit of Maidan lives on. And I think the revolution of dignity, in order for it to come to full fruition, will need to continue to have support from countries like the United States, my country, the European Union, and others around the world to ensure that the ideals that were represented by those 100 martyrs can be fully implemented. With that, any questions or
I'd like to ask
thoughts?
a question about the sanctions on Russia. Do you think is the Senate and the House of Representatives ready to ramp up the level of sanctions if there is a further escalation in the east, and if Russia does not really give up supplying weapons to the rebels and actually sending their troops down there to keep that situation volatile there?
Yes. The issue before us, as you know, is whether the sanctions will continue. The time period, it appears to be the end of June, perhaps July, when that decision might be made. I strongly believe that there is no reason to relieve the sanctions. Maybe something miraculous will happen between now and then, that the Russians will pull back, that the sovereign border of Ukraine will be respected, that international observers or an international peacekeeping force could be in place. But short of that, absolutely. We have to remember Crimea as well. The sanctions were put in place initially, not just in response to the aggression on the eastern border, but also the annexation and invasion of Crimea. So I don't think we should be relaxing the sanctions, and I think we need to stick together. The United States, the European Union, and others to ensure that we're putting maximum pressure on Russia and on President Putin to do the right thing.
Ruslan Dinichenko, Voice of America. Senator, a few days ago, Ukrainian media reported that Ukraine next year will not see any military assistance from the United States. At least there is no money in the budget draft. Considering that you are from Budget Committee, can you please clarify, do you see any, don't you see any military threats from Russia anymore, or could you please explain it?
There is money in the budget this year, for this fiscal year. That would expire at the end of the fiscal year, September 30. I fully expect that there will be additional funds provided for the next fiscal year. That decision will be made as part of the appropriations process, which is now underway. And I certainly will be personally fighting for that military assistance. And again, consistent with the legislation which passed last year to authorize military assistance, lethal and non-lethal. I hope the administration will continue to work with us to try to provide Ukraine what they need to defend themselves. So I do not believe that there will be a cutoff of funding. In fact, I believe the funding will continue. At what level, I'm not sure. I would hope that if the current situation continues, that there would be even an increase in the funding and the commitment, training, equipment. I got a lot of feedback today, as you can imagine, in my meetings about what's really needed. And I'm taking that information back to Washington with me. By the way, I also took the opportunity while I was here to tour the town and to go to see the Russian tanks, Russian armored personnel carriers, Russian rocket launchers that have been captured on the battlefield. And as has been displayed here in Kyiv, in Ukrainian, but also in English and also in Russian, clearly these are weapons that came from Russia. The separatists would have no reason to have had these weapons. They were not part of the Ukrainian army at any time. And the tracing of these weapons back to Russia is very clearly cataloged now and identified. And I do think that we need to be very clear with the American people and with the European Union and the citizens of the European Union and others around the world who care about peace and stability about what is really going on. And what's really going on is these weapons have been brought into Ukraine by the Russians, supplied to the separatists. And as you know, there's also very good information that I was able to get further detail on yesterday and today about the presence of Russian military personnel in Ukraine, in Luhansk, in Donetsk. And we need to be clear on that so that there's no misunderstanding about what is going on in the eastern border.
Just one last question on trade. We know that you were a trade representative, and currently Ukraine's foreign trade, we're now suffering a great deal because of the war with Russia. 30% of our export was for Russia. Some of that is still there, but we are losing the market, and apparently Ukraine needs to diversify and leverage WTO and our now EU-Ukraine agreement on association and free trade agreement. But I wonder, is there any way that the US government could provide assistance for Ukraine to develop export promotion strategy, or help us actually find and facilitate finding new markets actually, so that we are not so much dependent on Russia?
Yes, I think there are two things that we can and should do, and the embassy is represented here today, and they are actively involved in both of these fronts. One is U.S. investment here. Two sectors that I found there is a particular interest in is agriculture. The agribusiness connection with the United States is very interesting because we have very similar topography, climate in our northern Great Plains, and there's an opportunity for additional exchange of information, technology. We have very highly productive farms in the northern Great Plains, and some of that technology could be very helpful, I'm told here. So it's about investment. It's also about sharing best practices. It's about taking advantage of this huge opportunity and this great resource that Ukraine has, and using it more for export. And then second is helping to develop additional markets and to expand the exports from Ukraine. We were able to talk about some of the concerns that some of us have about intellectual property protection, to be sure that with regard to U.S. investment, that there is the ability to protect trademarks, copyrights, that there's a way to get royalties back to the proper owners of those intellectual property. And that's part of trade. In other words, to be able to export more and open up more markets, we need to be sure that there are also the reforms in place here. I got assurances those reforms are proceeding, along with many other reforms, fighting corruption, for instance, reforms to the National Border Patrol, the police patrol, the work that's being done with the United States government on cybersecurity. There are many things that are going on, but one is in the trade area, to be sure that we can have more free and open trade, certainly between Ukraine and the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all.